Well, hey everyone, I hope you're having a really good second week of your holidays, and I hope that you're feeling rested. And actually, we're going to spend the next little while thinking through rest together. Now, I'm not talking rest like just putting your feet up on the couch and falling asleep to Netflix with a half-chewed mouth of popcorn. I'm not talking rest like doing absolutely nothing whatsoever so that you're bored out of your brain. I'm talking rest like finding time to really stop and reflect and think about the rest that God brings. Now, I'm sure that there's tons that make your minds not rest at the moment. There's lots that you might be worrying about, whether that's what's happening with school and when that's going back, or feeling stressed because you just can't see your friends and family like you usually would. But we're going to spend some time together looking through these passages in our reading plan, which really center on the steadfastness and certainty of Jesus. Now, that plan's going to be on the YouVersion app, and the link is going to be in the bio, so you can join in and share your thoughts about what you're reading. And to help us kick off the first one today, I'm going to show you what I usually do when I look at a passage in my own quiet times. So let's go have a look at that.
All right, so this is our first reading from our new reading plan. It's from Matthew chapter 6, verse 25 through to 34. And when I'm doing my quiet times, the way I like to do it is by following this 4-step process, which is really easy to remember. You just have to remember the word REAP. And it stands for read, explore, apply, and pray. And that's kind of the 4 steps of what I do when I sit down and just look at a page in the Bible. And they're kind of 4 things to help you think through what you're meant to be actually doing. Now, read is easy. You just read it, explore. You think through who's it written to, what's being said, what is the kind of the things going on. Apply, what's this actually mean to me, and pray. You ask God to help you apply it, what you've learned. Now, we won't read it together today because I'll let you do that on your own. So let's skip over that and go to explore. So with the explore, it's a good thing to look at this passage and see what's being said, who is it being said to, and try and figure out some of those main points. And I guess the first thing that I see when I look at this chunk of text and when I read it out is that the word worry is used a whole lot. There's a repeated word throughout this whole section. So that's obviously going to be one of kind of the central points about this passage. It's about worrying. So we can go through and highlight all of those. And then it's probably a good idea to start with figuring out who is speaking here and what they're saying and who they're talking to. And so if we look at it in its context in Matthew chapter 6, we see that it's Jesus speaking. Jesus is the one who is talking these words, and Matthew's recording them for us, and he's speaking to the disciples. So Jesus is talking. And when we see a therefore at the start of something, it's actually always a good idea to check it out. A good thing to remember is when you see the word therefore, figure out what it's there for. And if we look at the section immediately before this, we can see that Jesus is talking about building up treasures in heaven versus building up treasures on earth. People being more concerned about what stuff they have rather than about building up heavenly treasures, which is pleasing to God, where that earthly stuff just won't get you anywhere. That material wealth will do nothing. So there's kind of the immediate context of what's going on here. And so we can see that kind of links in with what we're talking about here, because Jesus is talking about food and clothes. He's talking about daily needs that people have, even his disciples would have. Particularly they would have had, because they gave up everything to go follow Jesus. And it makes sense that they would worry about it, but Jesus says not to. Don't worry about these things. And then he asks them this with a whole stack of questions, rhetorical questions, which they would have known the answer to. I mean, they would have known exactly what Jesus was talking about when he asked her these questions. Is the body more than clothes, and is life more than food? Well, of course it is. That was the really simple, obvious answer. Yes, it really is. And are you more valuable than birds? Well, of course you are. Of course people are more valuable than birds. And if you're worrying, can you add a single hour to your life? Well, of course not. That is what's going on there. And so while they might have a lot of reason to fear about their material stuff, Jesus says, don't fear about that. There is something bigger going on here, because you have a God who cares for you. You have a God who cares for you. You're worth more than birds, and yet they're still fed. You don't need to worry. You need to trust in God. And he does this through these natural things that he talks about: the birds and the flowers of the field and the grass of the field. All these things God looks after and sustains, but they're just part of his regular creation. And we know that God has a far greater concern for people. And so worrying actually isn't going to do anything. Worrying actually says that you don't trust God to care for people in the way that we know he does. And so that's why he says to not worry and instead to trust in God. We see this down here in verse 33, where he says that the thing they should do instead of worrying is seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness. Because those things come first, and all those other things like clothes and food, they come second. Now, when you look at this, there's a bit of a question mark, because there are Christians out there who don't have enough food or clothes. And so we can kind of say that this isn't a passage saying that God will clothe and feed absolutely everyone. No, the central point of this is actually about trusting God. And because Jesus is talking here, it's about trusting Jesus. Now, with the way that the disciples can see that God cares about them so much is that that God has sent Jesus to deal with their big problem, not necessarily to deal with their food and their clothes, but to deal with the sin that keeps them out of God's family. So instead of worrying, they should trust Jesus. Now, that's a quick explore. Now, thinking about applying it to us, well, we can see that the main point, trust Jesus, is very applicable to us. We need to trust Jesus. Even if there's a lot of uncertainty going on, even if we don't know when school's going back, even if we can't see our friends or our family, we can trust Jesus because we know that God cares for us. We can see the way God cares for us throughout the Bible, and particularly in Jesus, in the way that he dies and raises back to life to take away our sins. And so when we think about applying this as well, we can pray to God to ask him to help us trust him. We can pray that particularly when things are tricky, when things are uncertain, when we're just not sure, we can pray that we might turn to God rather than worrying, rather than just saying it's too tough, it's too confusing. We can pray that we would be moved always first to go to the God who cares for us. Well, I hope this was helpful for you as we've looked at how to do a study, and it'd be great if you could jump online on the YouVersion app, and I'll see your comments there.